Tourism is one of Britain's biggest and most important businesses, employing over 1 million people. Tourists flock from all over the world to experience our unique history, sites and cultures. But there's one place that has been at the forefront of British tourism for well over a century: Blackpool. So what led this insignificant coastal village to become one of Britain's premier seaside resorts? In this programme, we'll look at how Blackpool became a tourist destination, Blackpool in its heyday, the decline and fall of the resort as a tourist destination, how Blackpool is fighting back, and touch on the future of the town as a tourist destination. Throughout the film, we'll be comparing the fortunes of Blackpool as a tourist destination with that of the island of Tobago in the Caribbean. Blackpool is located on the northwest coast of England, in Lancashire, around 30 miles north of Liverpool. Until the mid-1800s, Blackpool was an unassuming fishing village. But then something happened to change this town's fortune forever: the railway. Arriving in Blackpool in 1846, the railway network was instrumental in turning a sleepy backwater into one of Europe's biggest holiday resorts. The rail network in Victorian Britain was a major part of the Industrial Revolution. Not only did it provide movement of precious materials like iron ore, coal and cotton, but for the first time it provided long-distance, cheap travel for the working classes. They could now escape the tough urban towns and cities where they worked and visit other parts of the country, particularly the seaside. Blackpool was about to explode with life. The working class of England's northwest had found their playground.
The Industrial Revolution is largely responsible for the development of mass tourism, in as much as it created new industrial towns and cities which were pretty oppressive, congested places to live in, and so residents of those towns and cities were looking for a place to escape, and the nearest place for many of them was the seaside. It's been said that Thomas Cook came up with the first package holidays in the 19th century, middle of the 19th century, but working class holidays were more of a late 19th, early 20th century invention.
Blackpool grew rapidly. With this came more accommodation, more attractions, more places to eat and drink, inviting investment in a new industry: tourism. First came the North Pier in 1863. It was an immediate success. It was so successful that 5 years later a second pier was built. The Central Pier was completed in 1868. Blackpool was getting a reputation as the place to visit. The town became one of Britain's first mass tourist destinations. And when the weather was a little bit too British, there was always the Winter Gardens, an indoor entertainment complex built in 1878. Over time, it developed to include a ballroom, theatre, conservatories, opera house, and many other indoor attractions. During Victorian times, the town continued to expand, and in 1879, a new attraction was born. Blackpool illuminations were billed as the greatest free light show on earth. At a time when most people used candles or paraffin lamps to light their dark and often overcrowded homes, the lights, as they were known, were a revelation. Next came the South Pier in 1893. Blackpool was now the only seaside town with 3 piers. But it was still without one of its most iconic features: Blackpool Tower. When it opened in 1894, it was an instant hit. It's 158 metres high and visible for 30 miles. 3,000 people paid 6p to ride up here just on the opening day. The tower complex boasted a ballroom, aquarium and circus. From the late 19th century to the mid-20th century, there really was no stopping Blackpool. The town and number of people visiting it grew and grew. A 2-mile-long seawall was built in 1899 to protect the town, residents and visitors from coastal erosion. This is now known as the Golden Mile, the stretch of promenade between the north and south piers. In the late 19th century, it was lined with fairground rides, fortune tellers and oyster bars set up in front of boarding houses. Banned from using the beach, enterprising locals created this new area to part tourists from their cash. In the 18th century, Blackpool was a fishing village. Then, in the 19th century, new railways linked Blackpool to the industrial cities in northern England. Factory workers were given holidays and wanted to visit the seaside. In order to entice these workers, Blackpool built tourist attractions. The town experienced rapid population growth as jobs were created by mass tourism. By 1930, 7 million visitors per year came to Blackpool, 3 times as many as its nearest British rivals, mainly from the industrial towns of East Lancashire and West Yorkshire. After the Second World War, Blackpool's popularity grew to a high point, attracting up to 17 million visitors a year. Pretty amazing for a town that only had 150,000 residents. Blackpool was the place to go. A town built on servicing the needs of holidaymakers. The hotels and boarding houses were full and visitors returned year after year. Hotels like the Savoy were crammed. It was a golden age for Blackpool. Blackpool was a centre of fun and relaxation, a far cry from the industrial cities they lived and worked in.
Entrepreneurs realised the opportunity of people coming, and so we found things like the Pleasure Beach, the Tower, the Winter Gardens and the piers all created with wonderful attractions that changed year on year and gave people many reasons to return.
Blackpool Pleasure Beach had been gradually growing in size and importance since the 1890s. By the 1950s, roller coasters such as the Big Dipper and the Grand National have been thrilling people from all over the country.
Blackpool was very heavily dependent on tourism, is still very heavily dependent on tourism. It was all about the visitor economy and the need for people to relax and have fun, and Blackpool's business is built up around that. Tourism has changed in time, so we're not seeing the same numbers of people coming along, and we've seen changes in the pattern of where people travel chasing the sun. But yes, it is still heavily dependent on tourism, and we still do get more tourists than anywhere else.
The sleepy fishing village had gone. Blackpool was now at the centre of Britain's tourism industry. In its heyday, Blackpool attracted millions of visitors every year. Blackpool relied on return visitors, with many tourists coming back every year. Its whole economy depended heavily on tourism. And by the 1950s, Blackpool had achieved success and consolidation as a tourist resort. For over 50 years, Blackpool led British tourism. Millions of visitors parting with their money year upon year made the town vibrant, confident, successful. But there was a threat on the horizon. In contrast to the railways creating modern Blackpool, bringing tourists in, another newer form of transport was about to take them away. That transport was the aeroplane. Post-war austerity was over. People had more disposable income and more free time to spend it, as workers received more paid holidays. Air travel was becoming more widespread and affordable, offering guaranteed sunshine for their 2-week break. The 1960s saw the birth of package holidays. where flights, transfers, food and accommodation were all included. This was bad news for Blackpool's holiday industry.
UK resorts initially withstood the competitive threat of overseas package holiday destinations, but certainly they were suffering by the late 1970s, early 1980s. It's been estimated that between 1979 and 1988 they lost somewhere in the region of 39 million visitor nights.
British tourists wanted more than our seaside resorts could offer. Millions of them swapped bed and breakfast houses, buckets and spades and fish and chips for something new and exciting. Blackpool had serious competition.
By the 90s, the competitive threat was coming from the Caribbean, Southeast Asia and so on. Again, it's partly to do with sunshine, that they could offer lots of it, but also a kind of different tourist experience. I think by this stage people were getting bored of beaches and looking for something new, looking for something that was culturally different from what they were used to in their everyday lives.
In the past, tourism, while there was tourism, while Tobago had its fascination, tourism wasn't seen as a viable and important economic activity. It was up until 2001 the real thrust towards tourism, recognizing tourism as an important economic activity, recognizing that we had a unique product and determining to develop it and so on. We are a twin island state, Trinidad and Tobago. But in terms of the tourism product, we are different. Trinidad is a more developed island, and its products is largely related to the culture, carnival, and business. Tobago is a leisure destination.
Stagnation is the stage of Butler's model where the number of tourist arrivals peak. It's a particularly important point in resource development because it depends on the action of, say, local councils, businesses, as to whether those numbers will start climbing again or whether they'll reduce.
We have invested in the Tobago Hospitality and Tourism Institute, where we recognize the need to provide avenues to train and upgrade the skills in the industry.
Tobago's economy is heavily based on tourism, so we are at candidacy status with the Accreditation Council of Trinidad and Tobago, one of the only 8 institutions in the entire nation. That's something we are very proud of, and so we just encourage persons to come, whether they do a short course or they go right up to the bachelor's degree, to just take part in the programs, learn about Tobago, learn about proper hygiene, cooking, and how to interface with persons just as I'm interacting with you here, to make the whole tourism experience for the island of Tobago a memorable one.
The novelty of affordable air travel drew tourists away from Britain's coastal resorts. Visitor numbers and spending was down. Money for investment to compete with developing resorts abroad was hard to come by. Blackpool was in trouble.
As the tourism industry contracts in these destinations, so people lose their livelihoods, their jobs. You have a number of social and economic problems associated with that. And many of these destinations, we have to remember, were built for one sole purpose, and that was to entertain holidaymakers. So when the holidaymakers don't come anymore, then you have to look to new industries and new uses. And unfortunately, in many cases, those alternative industries simply aren't there.
We are consciously making an effort to expand because we don't have a very large room stock. We probably, if we count everything, we will barely get over 2,000 rooms. But in terms of those that we can market internationally as upscale, we are just maybe less than half of that, maybe 800 thereabout, of that, at that level. And we are making a conscious effort to attract and to obtain additional room stock at the high level.
We set a standard for Tobago. I think that it's one of the best hotels in the island. So we tend to maybe raise the bar in terms of tourism and customer service on the island of Tobago. So it really is important for the island to have this hotel as an offering to the world.
Numbers of UK residents travelling abroad for their holidays rose year on year. In 1971, 6.7 million were made abroad. By 2009, the figure was 58.5 million. Every pound spent abroad was a pound not spent here, and the negative ripple effect meant that Blackpool's days as one of Britain's biggest tourist money spinners were over. From the 60s onwards, people's disposable income rose. Workers got more time off work. They could afford cheap package holidays. This competition meant Blackpool had less visitors. Less visitors meant the town had less money to invest. The negative ripple effect. Blackpool's tourist industry was in decline. Blackpool had to change. Without the regular return visitors of a bygone age, and with the town reliant on ever-decreasing tourist income, a new face of Blackpool emerged. Desperate to keep their businesses afloat, locals enticed visitors with cheaper accommodation, cheap food, and cheap drink. The town's reputation changed. Blackpool became synonymous with loud, boozy stag and hen weekends, happy hours, and late-night kebabs. The drink-fueled excess often spilled over into antisocial behaviour. Blackpool was no longer the family-friendly resort it once was. Boarding houses and hotels that once welcomed families on their annual holidays now attracted groups of young people out for a good time.
The initial reaction was to cut prices to try and compete, and of course what that led to was this vicious cycle, this down market drift where more tourists were coming but they were lower spending tourists, and so the resort wasn't getting much out of them.
Blackpool's tourism officials had not given up. There was constant effort to rejuvenate this ailing town.
The real business for Blackpool is to actually put people into those 60,000 bed spaces that we still have in the town. And so the key for us has always been around making sure that we actually deliver within Blackpool new and vibrant attractions. And so the moves very recently, just this year, to actually acquire the tower and the winter gardens from the private sector and bring it into the public sector is not because we believe the public sector can run them better, but because we realise they need to be invested in substantially. And the only way to do that is actually to have them publicly owned. So those assets have become publicly owned, and we have secured major contracts with Merlin, who are the second biggest operator in the world after Disney, who are bringing their brands to Blackpool from next year, with the changes to the seafront that have given us a whole new promenade and new spaces that will take events for up to 20,000 people, outdoor events right in front of the tower, and the new headlands that have been created there. There's 10.5 hectares of new land right along the seafront that have been put in place, initially creating sea defences to stop the sea coming in and creating havoc, but actually normally that's done by building a wall. We don't want to do that. We want to actually access the sea views, and so we've built out, created this new land and created much better access to the seafront, which was the whole reason why Blackpool existed in the first place.
Blackpool had to adapt and change in order to appeal to its 21st century visitors. It couldn't cling to the past, it had to look to the future. It became imperative to focus on finding the way to entice new visitors to the destination. The island of Tobago rose to this challenge by moving in a new direction, towards ecotourism.
Tobago remains very pristine. Tobago is largely still very unspoilt. And you know, yes, you can have the sea and the sun here like in any other tropical destination. But you can't go very far in Tobago without encountering nature. It remains pristine, it remains largely unspoiled. And this is what I think is a critical part of the attraction.
The coral reef and the marine space, it employs lots of people. You talk the boating, the hoteliers are involved. It's a total package as far as tourism is concerned in the marine space. So it's not just the beautiful sand on the beach. You can get that anywhere, but you cannot get the brain coral anywhere but in Speyside, Tobago. And it's for this reason why we are now looking to put Speyside, that little village, and the marine park, to have it preserved and to put some policing into it so that you don't go and extract the coral and catch the wrong fish in the space. And so we want to keep it so because it's a nice tourism park.
We've won on 4 occasions the best eco destination from the World Travel Awards program, 2003, 2004, 2005, 2006.
Blackpool attracted a new type of down-market visitor. Its status fell, as did its reputation. Blackpool fought to rebuild its reputation and tried to rejuvenate by offering cheap weekend parties. Tobago opted for eco-tourism. So what's to be done? In parts of Blackpool, life is tough, with high unemployment and many people living on benefits. You might say, so what? What if Blackpool declines further? What difference would it make?
If there was no action at all to prevent decline, then we could speculate that the resort would become a ghost town. I mean, that's an exaggeration, if you like, because I think very few resorts have stood back and done nothing. They've found money, maybe from government or from the European Union, to invest in new attractions and in environmental improvements more generally. But certainly the outlook would be bleak for the destination that chose to do nothing.
If Blackpool is to thrive in the 21st century, what needs to happen? Investment is vital, but where does investment come from?
It's important that we put in place the infrastructure that allows confidence from private investors to bring them into the town. That's what we've been doing in terms of the approach roads, the access to the town, new climbing walls and parks that have been put in place, a new arrival point in terms of Blackpool North Station and how we again address the area around there, and then actually sorting out the seafront itself to make it an attractive, appealing space with the money, public money, put into those things, and also indeed the tramway, which has been completely refurbished as part of this exercise. With all of that in place, we're then in a position where we can attract private investment, and that's what we're now seeing come through.
To instigate new growth, it's not just upkeep of the town that's needed, it's improvement across the board. Tobago found a new niche, becoming an important coral conservation area. They created a new type of resort based on ecotourism. They play to their strength.
There's that in Tobago, we as a government is doing our best to maintain the environment, to maintain Tobago being ecotourism destination. Our theme for Tobago, I must tell you, is keeping Tobago clean, green, safe and serene.
I just love the diving, and I'm just glad that I can help save the reefs and all the environment in that.
The best thing about my experience coming to Tobago is meeting so many different types of people. I mean, there's American people here, British people here, Tobagan people here, people from Trinidad, like so many different people. People from Holland, they come and they go, like so many people coming in and out of this commune. And I also like the idea of working together. It's a little bit more responsibility than what it felt like at home.
So, can Blackpool do the same?
It's very much about ensuring that we continue to deliver right across the range and not to sink toward the lowest common denominator, as again has happened around many resorts around the country. We want to make sure that everyone does have a reason to come here, and we believe that the new leisure brands that we're bringing in and the new developments in terms of the infrastructure and the public realm around Blackpool will indeed create something for everyone to see and to do.
If Blackpool does nothing, it will decline further. There's no quick fix. Blackpool is working hard to find private and public investment. There are so many options for new markets to be explored, including upscale accommodations, new attractions, and investment from international organisations can all assist in the rejuvenation process. So what's the best way forward for Blackpool?
In the past, people just got away and that was it. To be away somewhere different was considered a rest. You know, change is as good as a rest. These days we expect to get at least as good as we have at home and better. And so we need to have accommodation that matches up to the requirements that people have. And it's all about quality. And we believe that by delivering quality, we will deliver the reasons for people to come, to stay, to tell their friends and to come back again.
The grand old king of British seaside resorts has been through tough times before. But with a carefully structured regeneration strategy, let's hope there's life left in this iconic destination to see it through the 21st century.